My uncle called me 3 weeks before Christmas and asked if I had received the package he sent. I told him I hadn't received any package. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The tuition payment. Did the school confirm it?" I sat down on the floor of my apartment, the one I shared with 2 other girls, because I couldn't afford anything else, and I said, "Uncle Robert, what tuition payment?" He hung up before I could ask anything else. That was the phone call that unraveled 5 years of my life in under 30 seconds. Let me back up. My name is Claire, and I am 28 years old. I graduated barely, and late with a degree in architecture from a state university in Ohio. I say barely and late, because for 3 of my 4 years in school, I worked 2 jobs. One at a coffee shop from 5 in the morning until noon, and one at a campus library from 6 in the evening until 10 at night. I ate a lot of pasta. I deferred 1 semester because I couldn't cover a balance the financial aid office said was still outstanding. I cried in a parking garage once because I had $43 in my account and rent was due in 4 days. I never thought to ask my parents why. My father is a financial advisor. My mother manages the back office of his firm. They live in a 5-bedroom house in a suburb of Columbus with a 3-car garage and a kitchen that was renovated twice in the last 6 years. Growing up, we were not rich, but we were comfortable. I had clothes. I had a car at 16. I had a room that was mine. When I left for college, things shifted. My parents told me that they had saved what they could, but that tuition had become more expensive than expected, and that I needed to learn financial responsibility. My father used that phrase often, financial responsibility. He said it the way some people say a prayer, quietly, firmly, like it settled something. I believed him. I was 18. I believed everything he told me. My uncle, my father's younger brother, lived in Seattle. He ran a small construction supply company that had done well over the years. He had never married, had no children, and had always been the kind of man who showed up at birthdays with envelopes instead of presents. When I left for college, he told me he wanted to help. He told my parents he would contribute to my education. He said it in front of me at a family dinner the August before my freshman year. My father nodded and said he appreciated that, and my mother smiled, and I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was settled. Uncle Robert contributed $1,200 a month for the entire 4 years I was in school. 48 months. I did the math later, sitting on that apartment floor with my phone in my lap. $57,600. Sent to my parents every single month, labeled clearly as education support for Claire, deposited into an account I had no access to and no knowledge of. I had worked 2 jobs and deferred a semester and eaten pasta 5 nights a week for 4 years. And $57,000 had been sitting somewhere that was not with me. The Christmas dinner that year was at my parents' house. It was the kind of gathering my mother organized, like a military operation-specific arrival times, assigned seating, a printed menu on each plate. My aunt and her husband drove up from Cincinnati. My cousin Maya came with her boyfriend, and Uncle Robert flew in from Seattle, which he did every other year, and which I had been looking forward to for months, because after that phone call we had spoken twice more, and each time he had said only, "Let's talk in person, Claire. Let's talk at Christmas." I arrived early to help my mother with the appetizers. She was in the kitchen in a red blouse, slicing cheese, asking me about my job. I was working at a small firm downtown. Entry level, decent pay, finally starting to feel like an adult, and I watched her hands move over the cutting board and I thought about $57,000 and I said nothing. My father was in the living room with the television on. Football, glass of scotch, completely relaxed. He asked how my commute had been. I said fine. He said the firm I worked for had a good reputation. I said thank you. We did not look at each other for longer than 3 seconds. Uncle Robert arrived at 5:15. He hugged me at the door and held on for a beat longer than usual. And when he pulled back, he looked at my face and said, quietly, "You okay?" I said I was fine. He said, "Good. Stay close to me tonight." Dinner was the way my mother's dinners always were, warm and beautiful and slightly suffocating. The table looked perfect. The food was perfect. My father opened a bottle of wine that my aunt praised, and my mother accepted the compliment like she had expected it. Everyone talked about the holidays and travel plans and Maya's boyfriend's new job, and it was all so normal that I started to wonder if I had misunderstood something, if maybe the money had gone somewhere legitimate, if maybe I was about to embarrass myself. Then Uncle Robert set down his fork. He didn't clear his throat or tap his glass or do anything that signaled a speech was coming. He just set down his fork, folded his hands on the table, and said, in a completely level voice, "I want to talk about the money I sent for Claire's education." The table went the kind of quiet that happens when everyone hears something and no one knows whether to acknowledge it. My mother's hand moved to her wine glass. My father did not move at all. Uncle Robert said, I sent $1,200 a month for 4 years. I have every transfer confirmation. The account I sent it to was opened jointly by you two. He looked at my parents, and it was opened the same month Claire started school. Claire was not on that account. Claire had no access to that account. I only learned this recently. My cousin Maya had stopped chewing. My father said, "Robert, this isn't the time or place." "I've been waiting for a better time for 3 months," Uncle Robert said. "I'd like to know what happened to the money." My mother said the money had been used for Claire's expenses, books, housing, the car insurance we kept her on. She said this smoothly and quickly, like she had rehearsed it. And maybe she had. I said, "I paid my own rent. I paid my own groceries. I worked at a coffee shop at 5 in the morning. I deferred a semester because of an outstanding balance." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "What expenses are you talking about?" My mother said that managing finances was complicated and that I hadn't always understood the full picture. My father said that they had made judgment calls about how to allocate resources and that they stood by those decisions. Uncle Robert reached down beside his chair and lifted a manila folder onto the table. He set it in the center, between the centerpiece candles and the gravy boat, and he said, "I had an accountant go through everything: bank statements, transfers, withdrawals, card transactions linked to that account over 4 years." He opened the folder. He did not hand anything to my parents. He simply turned the first page toward them so they could see it, and he waited. My father looked at the page. Something happened to his face. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was more like a calculation running out of numbers. Like a man watching a door he thought was locked swing open on its own. My mother said, "This is private family business, and I don't think—" $57,600, Uncle Robert said. "I want to know specifically how that money was used for Claire's education. Line by line, if you have it." My father said that records from that long ago were hard to reconstruct. My mother said that they had done the best they could with what they had. And then my father made the mistake that changed everything. He looked at me across the table and he said, "You have always had expensive expectations, Claire. We were managing your financial reality for you because, frankly, you weren't equipped to do it yourself." The table went quiet again, but differently this time. My aunt put her fork down. Maya's boyfriend looked at the ceiling. I said, "I slept on a futon for 2 years and I ate plain rice when I ran out of pasta. What was my expensive expectation, knowing that money sent for me existed?" My father said I was being dramatic. Uncle Robert said, "I have documentation of $17,000 moved from that account into a joint personal account held by you and Linda." He nodded toward my mother. "Over the same 4-year period, consistent transfers, not tuition payments, not university transactions, personal account." My mother said that managing household finances sometimes required moving money between accounts and that this was perfectly legal. Uncle Robert said, "I'm not disputing that it's legal. I'm asking why $17,000 that I sent for my niece's education ended up in your personal account while she was working 2 jobs and deferring semesters." My father said, "Robert, you donated that money to us as a family contribution. How we allocated it." "I sent it labeled for Claire's education," Uncle Robert said. "I have the memo line on every single transfer. It says Claire Education Support. I didn't donate it to you. I sent it for her." My mother said that the memo line didn't constitute a legal directive. And my father leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and said, "We made investment decisions for this family. Sometimes investments don't pay out the way you hope." I looked at my father. I had spent 5 years feeling guilty for struggling. 5 years thinking I just wasn't managing well enough, wasn't disciplined enough, wasn't financially responsible enough. His phrase, his words, in his voice, living rent-free in my head while I counted quarters for laundry. 5 years thinking I was the problem. I said, "I am not an investment." My mother said, "Claire, we sacrificed a great deal for you." "You sacrificed $57,000 that someone else sent," I said. "That's not your sacrifice. That's Uncle Robert's money and my 4 years." My father said that I was being ungrateful and emotional, and that this was exactly the kind of reaction that had made them feel they needed to manage things on my behalf. Uncle Robert said, "I've spoken to an attorney." My father stopped talking. Uncle Robert said, "I sent that money with a specific intended purpose. There is a legal argument to be made that redirecting it constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, and depending on how the attorney reads the documentation, potentially more than that. I am not here to make threats. I am here to ask, one final time, whether there is an explanation I have not heard." My mother started crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from remorse, the kind that comes from realizing a strategy isn't working. I had seen that cry before. At a teacher conference when I was 12, Had a conversation with my grandmother about a loan that went sideways. I recognized it the way you recognize a song you'd rather not know. My father said this was a family matter and should be handled privately. Uncle Robert said, I agree. Which is why I'm handling it here, tonight, privately, before I decide whether to take the next step. My aunt, who had not said a word since Uncle Robert first put down his fork, said quietly, David, just answer him. My father looked at his sister. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He said, the business had a difficult quarter. We needed liquidity. We intended to replace it. There it was. Not guilt, not apology. A cash flow problem. I was a cash flow solution. Uncle Robert closed the folder. He said, Claire, I owe you $57,600. I intend to send it to you directly to an account in your name, only in the next 10 business days. I should have done that from the beginning, and I am sorry I didn't. My mother said, Robert, you can't just... I can, he said. And I am. My father said that if Robert was going to take adversarial action against his own family, then maybe Robert should think about what that would mean for their relationship. Uncle Robert said, I've thought about it for 3 months. I'm comfortable with my decision. My father stood up from the table. He said that this dinner was over and that Robert needed to leave. Uncle Robert did not stand up. He looked at my father and he said, I'll leave when Claire is ready to leave. And before I do, I want to say one more thing. He looked around the table at my aunt, at Maya, at my cousin's boyfriend, at my mother still pressing a napkin to her eyes. I sent that money because Claire's family, and because I believed she was being supported. She was not supported. She struggled for 4 years while the money I sent for her sat in an account she didn't know existed. I want everyone at this table to know that. My father said something about ingratitude and interference and family loyalty. I pushed back my chair, and I picked up my coat from the back of it, and I said, Merry Christmas, Dad. And I walked out with Uncle Robert behind me. We sat in his rental car in my parents' driveway for a while without talking. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see the dining room chandelier, still lit, and the shadows of people moving around inside. My aunt's car was still there. Maya's car was still there. Uncle Robert said, I'm sorry it took me this long. I said, how did you find out? He said that he had called the university 2 years after I graduated to update his alumni giving information, and on a whim, he had asked whether the payment history on my account was complete. The financial aid office had told him carefully, with appropriate discretion, that my account had carried a balance in my junior year, significant enough to trigger an academic hold. He had sent $1,200 a month. Tuition had been covered by loans and my own income. The math hadn't added up, and it had taken him 2 more years to sit down with an accountant and make himself look at what the numbers actually said. He said, I kept thinking there must be a reasonable explanation. I said, I kept thinking the same thing about why I was so broke. He laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that comes out when the alternative is worse. The money arrived in my account 11 days after Christmas. $57,600, transferred in a single transaction with a memo line that said, for Claire, always was. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building, and I looked at my banking app for a long time. I thought about the futon. I thought about the pasta. I thought about the semester I deferred, and the day I cried over $43, and the number of times I had heard the phrase financial responsibility used as a reason why I should feel bad about struggling. I thought about my father sitting back in his chair and saying, investment. I called my uncle and I said, thank you. He said, don't thank me. Go do something with it. I put 3 months of expenses in savings. I paid off the last of my student loans, the ones I had taken out because the outstanding balance had no explanation anyone would give me. I put the rest toward a down payment fund for a place that would be mine. My parents called twice in January. I didn't answer. My mother sent a text that said they hoped I understood that they had always acted in my best interest and that family meant being able to move past difficult moments. I read it twice and then I set my phone face down on my desk and I went back to work. My father sent an email in February. It was 3 paragraphs long. The word investment did not appear in it, but the phrase financial decisions made on your behalf did. I read the first sentence and closed it. Some people say you should always leave a door open with family. That time heals things. That the people who raised you deserve a particular kind of patience that you wouldn't give anyone else. I used to believe that. I believe that the people who raised you should not use the money someone sent for your education to cover a bad business quarter while you rationed your groceries and blamed yourself for not being disciplined enough. I believe that financial responsibility is a lesson and not a weapon. I believe that when someone shows you the folder when the numbers are right there on the table, and there is no explanation that holds what they do next, tells you everything you needed to know, My father's explanation was a bad quarter. My mother's explanation was tears that dried up the moment the folder closed. I don't leave doors open for people who only knock when they need something from the other side. Uncle Robert came back through Columbus in March, on his way to a conference in Pittsburgh. We had dinner at a Thai place near my apartment. He ordered too much food, like he always does, and he asked about my job and my apartment search and whether I was doing okay. I told him I was doing better than okay. He said, "Good. You were always going to be fine, Claire. I just wish you hadn't had to work so hard to get there." I said, "I think working hard was good for me, actually. I just wish I'd known that the struggle wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because someone took what was mine." He nodded. He picked up the check before I could reach for it, which I had expected. I thanked him. He waved it off the way he always does, like generosity is just a reflex for him and not a performance. Walking to my car, I thought about that Christmas table, the candles, the gravy boat, the folder sitting in the center of everything, like it had always belonged there, waiting for someone to put it down. My uncle had known for months, and he hadn't sent an email or made a phone call or written a letter. He had flown to Columbus, sat down at a holiday table, and made sure there were witnesses. He had brought documentation. He had spoken to an attorney before he said a single word. He had walked in ready. I think about that sometimes when I feel like situations are beyond my control. About the difference between reacting and preparing. About what it looks like when someone who loves you decides that enough is enough, not loudly, not messily, but clearly, with a folder on the table and every number accounted for. That is the only inheritance I needed. Everything else was just math.